The security guard crossed out her name with deliberate slowness, his smirk widening as he watched her face crumble. What he didn't know was that the girl in the secondhand dress standing before him was about to inherit an empire that could buy his precious club 10 times over. Chen had always been invisible in the best possible way. At 23, she possessed the kind of quiet beauty that people noticed only after she'd already left the room. Her dark hair fell in natural waves past her shoulders, and her eyes held the depth of someone who preferred observing to performing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She worked part-time at a small bookstore in downtown Seattle while finishing her master's degree in social work, spending her days surrounded by stories of other people's adventures while living what most would consider an unremarkably simple life. Her apartment was a studio above a Vietnamese restaurant, furnished with pieces from thrift stores and garage sales that she'd carefully restored. The walls were lined with books she'd collected over the years, each one a small treasure discovered in used bookstores or borrowed from the library where she'd spent countless childhood afternoons. Made her own coffee each morning in a French press that had been a graduation gift from her roommate, and she walked to work regardless of the weather because she couldn't afford a car and genuinely enjoyed the rhythm of the city waking up around her. What made Maya's life particularly complicated was the secret she'd been carrying for 15 years. Her father, David Chen, wasn't the struggling artist she told people he was. David Chen was the founder and CEO of Chen Technologies, a company that had revolutionized cloud computing and made him one of the wealthiest men in the Pacific Northwest. His net worth had been estimated at somewhere north of $8 billion, a number so large that Maya had trouble connecting it to the man who used to make her pancakes on Sunday mornings and help her with algebra homework. The separation had happened when Maya was 8 years old, not because of any dramatic falling out, but because her mother Emma had realized she couldn't handle the pressure of being married to someone whose business decisions affected thousands of jobs and whose every move was scrutinized by financial reporters. Emma had taken Maya and moved across the country, accepting a modest settlement that would ensure their comfortable but not lavish lifestyle, with one condition that David had reluctantly agreed to. Maya would grow up without the burden of his wealth, learning to make her own way in the world until she turned 25. They spoke twice a year, on her birthday and at Christmas, conversations that were warm but careful, both of them navigating the strange territory of loving someone you barely knew anymore. David sent cards that he clearly wrote himself, asking about her studies and her dreams, never mentioning his companies or his wealth. Maya wrote back about her books and her work at the store, never mentioning that she sometimes saw his face on the covers of business magazines at the grocery store checkout. The Emerald Heights Country Club occupied a full city block in the most expensive part of Seattle, its ivy-covered walls and wrought iron gates creating a fortress of exclusivity that had stood unchanged since 1924. Members included tech entrepreneurs, old logging money, shipping magnates, and the occasional celebrity who wanted to golf without being photographed. The initiation fee alone was rumored to cost more than most people made in 2 years, and the monthly dues could fund a family's vacation to Europe. Maya had never expected to set foot inside such a place, but her best friend Jessica had been dating the club's events coordinator for 6 months, and somehow that connection had resulted in Maya being hired for a temporary position helping with their annual charity auction. The job paid well enough that she could afford new textbooks for her final semester, and Jessica had assured her that the work would be simple, cataloging donated items and helping with setup. On her first day, Maya had dressed carefully in her best outfit, a navy blue dress she'd found at a consignment shop and altered to fit perfectly, paired with comfortable flats and a cardigan her grandmother had knitted. She'd pulled her hair back in a neat bun and added the small pearl earrings that had been her mother's, feeling confident that she looked professional and appropriate for the environment. The club's interior was everything she'd expected and more. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors. Oil paintings of stern-faced men in hunting gear lined the walls, and crystal chandeliers cast warm light over leather furniture that probably cost more than her annual rent. The auction items were displayed in the main ballroom. Everything from vacation packages to original artwork to vintage wines that collectors would pay thousands to own. Maya spent her first week working quietly and efficiently, arriving early and staying late to ensure every item was properly documented and displayed. She enjoyed the work, particularly reading the stories behind some of the donated pieces, and she found herself genuinely excited about the auction's purpose, raising money for scholarships for underprivileged students to attend college. The problems began during her second week, when she encountered Marcus Wellington III. Marcus was everything Maya had expected a country club owner to be, and somehow worse. Tall and imposing with silver hair that never seemed out of place. He wore custom suits that probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months, and had the kind of confident bearing that came from never having been told no about anything important. He'd inherited the club from his father, who'd inherited it from his father, and he ran it with the iron-fisted certainty of someone who'd never questioned his right to exclude others. Their first interaction had been brief and seemingly insignificant. Maya had been adjusting the display for a donated sculpture when Marcus approached with 2 other men, their conversation clearly about business deals worth millions of dollars. She'd stepped aside politely to let them pass, offering a small smile that went completely unnoticed. But Marcus had noticed something else. "Excuse me," he'd said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate attention. "You're the temporary girl, correct?" Maya had nodded, unsure why his tone made her feel like she'd done something wrong. "In the future, please ensure that your attire meets our standards. This is a private club, not a college campus." She'd looked down at her dress, confused and embarrassed, seeing nothing inappropriate about her appearance. The other men had continued their conversation as if she didn't exist, but she'd caught one of them glancing at her with the kind of dismissive amusement reserved for people who didn't matter. The criticism stung because Maya had been so careful about her appearance, but she'd assumed it was an isolated incident, perhaps Marcus having a bad day or misunderstanding her role. She'd gone home that evening and looked through her limited wardrobe, trying to figure out what had been wrong with what she'd chosen to wear. The second incident happened 3 days later. Maya had been working late, finishing the catalog for the wine collection, when she'd heard voices in the hallway outside the storage room. She'd recognized Marcus's voice immediately, along with several others she'd heard around the club. "The help is getting sloppy," Marcus had been saying. "That girl they hired for the auction looks like she shops at discount stores. It reflects poorly on the club's image." "The one with the dark hair?" another voice had asked. "She seems competent enough." "Competence isn't the issue," Marcus had replied coldly. "Presentation is everything. Our members expect a certain caliber of person handling their donations, not someone who looks like she can't afford to shop anywhere decent." Maya had stood frozen in the storage room, holding a bottle of wine worth more than her monthly rent, listening to herself being reduced to her clothing budget. The conversation had continued, but she'd stopped listening, too humiliated to process the rest of their words. That night she'd called Jessica, trying to keep her voice steady as she explained what had happened. "He's just a snob," Jessica had said firmly. "You look fine, Maya. You look professional and appropriate. Don't let some old rich guy make you feel bad about yourself." But the damage was done. Maya began second-guessing every choice she made about her appearance, spending money she couldn't afford on a new blouse, borrowing accessories from Jessica, and arriving at work feeling like she was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. The breaking point came during the final week before the auction. Maya had been working in the main ballroom, making last-minute adjustments to the displays, when a group of potential donors arrived for a preview event. These were the club's most important members, the people whose contributions would determine whether the scholarship fund reached its goal. Maya had dressed in her newest outfit, the blouse she'd splurged on paired with her best skirt and the heels that made her feet ache, but added the height she thought made her look more professional. She'd been arranging flowers around a donated jewelry display when she'd heard Marcus's voice behind her, speaking to someone she couldn't see. "We do our best to maintain standards," he was saying, "but occasionally we have to work with outside contractors who don't quite understand our expectations." Maya had glanced up, realizing they were talking about her, and found herself facing a small group of impeccably dressed women who were studying her with the kind of critical attention usually reserved for art in museums. "The auction setup looks lovely," one of them had said diplomatically. "Yes, well, we make do," Marcus had replied. "Though I must say, it's challenging when the temporary staff doesn't quite grasp the importance of presentation. Look at that girl, for instance. Sweet enough, I'm sure, but she's dressed like she's shopping at a mall outlet store." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The women had made polite murmuring sounds, but Maya had seen their eyes travel over her outfit, cataloging every piece and finding it wanting. She'd felt her face burn with embarrassment, as she'd realized that no matter how hard she tried, how carefully she chose her clothes, how professional she attempted to be, she would never meet their standards because she couldn't afford to meet their standards. But Marcus hadn't been finished. "It's unfortunate," he'd continued, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom, "when people don't understand that how you present yourself reflects not just on you, but on everyone around you. Some people simply weren't raised to understand these things." Maya had felt something break inside her chest, not just from the cruelty of his words, but from the casual way he delivered them, as if her feelings were so irrelevant that he didn't need to lower his voice or consider that she might be listening. She'd finished arranging the flowers with shaking hands, completed her tasks for the day, and left the club with as much dignity as she could manage. That evening she'd sat in her small apartment, looking at the clothes she'd spent money she didn't have trying to fit into a world that had already decided she didn't belong. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being judged as poor and unsuitable by people who had no idea that her father could buy their precious club without thinking twice about the expense. For the first time in years, Maya found herself wanting to call David, not for money or help, but simply to hear the voice of someone who loved her, regardless of what she wore or where she shopped. But their agreement had been clear, and she had one more year before she could bridge the gap that had grown between them. Instead, she did what she'd always done when the world felt too overwhelming. She made herself a cup of tea, picked up a book, and tried to lose herself in someone else's story, hoping that tomorrow would somehow be different. But tomorrow would bring the auction, and with it, a surprise that would change everything Maya thought she knew about power, family, and the price of judging people by their appearance. The morning of the auction, Maya arrived at the club earlier than necessary, partly because she wanted to ensure everything was perfect, and partly because she needed the extra time to prepare herself emotionally for what she knew would be a difficult day. She'd chosen her most conservative outfit, the navy dress that had served her well in the past, and she'd spent extra time on her hair and makeup, armor against the judgment she knew was coming. The ballroom looked magnificent. 3 weeks of careful preparation had transformed the space into something magical, with the donated items displayed like treasures in a museum and flowers adding warmth to the formal elegance of the room. Maya felt a surge of pride as she looked at her work, knowing that regardless of what Marcus Wellington thought of her clothes, she'd done her job exceptionally well. The setup crew arrived at noon, followed by the catering staff and the auctioneer, a distinguished man whose reputation for raising money for charity was legendary. Maya coordinated with each group, ensuring that everything ran smoothly, and she found herself genuinely excited about the evening ahead. The scholarship fund had already exceeded expectations thanks to advanced bidding, and she knew that dozens of students would benefit from the money raised tonight. As the afternoon progressed, club members began arriving for the cocktail hour that preceded the auction. Maya watched from the sidelines as women in designer gowns and men in perfect tuxedos filled the room, their conversations and laughter creating the kind of sophisticated atmosphere that made the club famous. She recognized several faces from business magazines and society pages, people whose donations tonight would be written about in tomorrow's newspapers. Marcus Wellington moved through the crowd like a king holding court, greeting members with the practiced charm of someone who'd been networking since childhood. Maya noticed how different he seemed with his peers, warm and engaging in a way she'd never seen directed toward her. It was a reminder that his coldness toward her had been a choice, not a personality trait. As the auction began, Maya took her position near the registration table, ready to assist with any issues that might arise. The auctioneer was masterful, building excitement for each item and encouraging competitive bidding that drove prices far above the estimated values. Maya found herself caught up in the energy of the room, watching as artwork, jewelry, and vacation packages were sold to enthusiastic bidders. It was during the bidding for a vintage wine collection that everything changed. Maya was checking her notes when she heard a commotion near the entrance to the ballroom. Voices were raised, though she couldn't make out the words over the auctioneer's ongoing presentation. She glanced up to see several staff members clustered around someone at the door, their body language suggesting confusion and perhaps concern. Marcus Wellington appeared beside the group, his usual composure showing cracks as he gestured emphatically at whoever was trying to enter. Maya watched with growing curiosity as the conversation continued, noting how other members had begun to notice the disturbance and were turning their attention away from the auction, Then she heard a voice that made her blood freeze in her veins. "I'm looking for my daughter, Maya Chen." The words carried across the ballroom with perfect clarity, spoken in the calm, measured tone that Maya remembered from childhood bedtime stories and Saturday morning conversations. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance, including Maya's, though she already knew what she would see. David Chen stood in the doorway of the Emerald Heights Country Club ballroom, looking exactly like what he was. A man whose wealth and power were so far beyond the comprehension of most people that he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He wore a simple black suit that probably cost more than Marcus Wellington's car, but he wore it with the easy confidence of someone who'd never spent a moment worrying about whether his clothes met anyone else's standards. The silence in the room was complete except for the auctioneer's voice, which faltered and then stopped entirely as he realized he'd lost his audience's attention. Maya felt the world tilt around her as every eye in the ballroom moved from her father to her, the connections forming in minds that were accustomed to calculating wealth and influence. She saw recognition dawn on Marcus Wellington's face, watched as his usual arrogance crumbled into something that looked remarkably like terror. "Maya," David said, his voice carrying easily across the space between them, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Maya felt every gaze in the ballroom burning into her as David Chen stepped forward, his presence commanding the kind of attention that money couldn't buy but power naturally attracted. Marcus Wellington's face had gone pale, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "Dad," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the collective-held breath of 200 wealthy socialites. She hadn't called him that in 15 years. David's eyes found hers across the room, and for a moment, the billionaire CEO disappeared, replaced by the father who used to read her stories about brave princesses and impossible dreams. "Hello, sweetheart. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd see how your work was going." The lie was gentle and obvious. David Chen didn't have neighborhoods he just happened to be in. Every minute of his time was scheduled, every appearance calculated. His presence here was as deliberate as a chess move. Marcus Wellington recovered first, stepping forward with the practiced smile of a man used to managing difficult situations. "Mr. Chen, what an unexpected pleasure. I'm Marcus Wellington, owner of the Emerald Heights Country Club. We had no idea you were planning to attend our little charity auction." David's gaze shifted to Marcus with the slow deliberation of a predator sizing up prey. "Little charity auction? I was under the impression this was quite an important event. My daughter has been telling me wonderful things about the scholarship fund." Maya blinked in surprise. She hadn't spoken to her father about her work here, hadn't spoken to him about anything in months. But David continued smoothly, his voice carrying that particular tone that made seasoned executives nervous. "Maya has such a gift for seeing the value in things others might overlook. It's one of her many talents." The emphasis on overlook was subtle but unmistakable, and Maya watched Marcus's throat work as he swallowed hard. Around them, conversations had resumed in hushed tones as club members tried to process what they were witnessing while pretending not to stare. "Your daughter has been most helpful with our preparations," Marcus managed, his usual commanding presence reduced to something that resembled a nervous teenager meeting his girlfriend's father. "Has she?" David's tone remained pleasantly conversational. "I do hope everyone has been treating her with the respect she deserves. Maya was raised to be gracious and professional, and I've always taught her that how people treat others says everything about their character." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of understanding through the crowd. Maya realized that somehow, some way, her father knew exactly what had been happening here. The recognition both thrilled and terrified her. Marcus's smile became increasingly strained. "Of course, Mr. Chen. Maya has been a valued member of our team." "Valued," David repeated thoughtfully. "That's good to hear. Though I confess, I've been concerned about some reports I've received regarding the club's management style. In my experience, organizations that don't value all their people tend to have deeper issues with their leadership." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Maya noticed several club members exchanging glances, clearly recognizing the shift in power dynamics happening before their eyes. "Perhaps," David continued, "we could discuss this further. I believe you mentioned that membership applications are currently being reviewed? Marcus nodded quickly, too quickly. Yes, of course. We'd be honored to consider your application, Mr. Chen. David smiled, and Maya recognized the expression from news interviews where he'd just announced an acquisition that would reshape entire industries. Actually, I was thinking of something more comprehensive. I've been looking for the right recreational investment, and a well-established club like this might be exactly what I need. The word investment hung in the air like a sword of Damocles. Everyone in the room understood what David Chen meant when he talked about investments. He didn't buy small percentages or silent partnerships. When David Chen invested in something, he typically ended up owning it. Marcus's face went through several interesting color changes. The club isn't currently for sale, Mr. Chen. Everything is for sale, Marcus. It's just a matter of finding the right price. David's tone remained friendly, conversational, but there was steel underneath the silk. Of course, I'd want to ensure that any organization I'm associated with reflects my values, particularly when it comes to how they treat people. Maya watched the exchange with growing amazement. Her father wasn't just defending her. He was systematically dismantling Marcus Wellington's entire world with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a shark. The auctioneer, clearly unsure whether to continue with the evening's program, looked helplessly between David and Marcus. Several club members had pulled out their phones, undoubtedly researching David Chen's net worth and trying to calculate whether he could actually follow through on his implied threats. "Dad," Maya said softly, stepping forward. "You don't need to do this." David turned to her, his expression gentling. "Actually, sweetheart, I think I do. You see, I've spent the last 15 years watching you grow into an extraordinary woman from a distance, respecting your mother's wishes that you make your own way in the world, but I never agreed to let people disrespect you." He looked back at Marcus, and his voice carried clearly enough for everyone in the ballroom to hear. "A gentleman recently made some comments about my daughter's appearance and background that I found deeply offensive. Comments that suggested she wasn't good enough for this establishment." Marcus went white. Several women gasped audibly, and Maya heard someone whisper, "Oh my God," from somewhere behind her. "The thing about being very wealthy," David continued conversationally, "is that it gives you options. For instance, I could buy this club tomorrow morning. I could buy the entire block it sits on. I could buy Marcus's house, his cars, and probably his children's college funds without affecting my quarterly budget." The ballroom had gone dead silent again. Maya could hear her own heartbeat. "But money isn't really the point, is it?" David smiled at Marcus with the warmth of a winter morning. "The point is respect. The point is understanding that a person's worth isn't determined by their clothing budget or their family name. The point is recognizing that when you treat someone badly, you reveal everything about yourself and nothing about them." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it, apparently unable to find words adequate to the situation. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. "The scholarship fund you're raising money for tonight. What's the current total?" Approximately $400,000, Marcus stammered. David wrote quickly, tore off the check, and handed it to Maya. "Sweetheart, would you mind donating this to the scholarship fund? I think education is important, don't you?" Maya looked at the check and felt her knees go weak. $1 million, written in her father's neat handwriting, with Maya Chen Scholarship Fund in the memo line. "Of course," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. David nodded approvingly, then addressed the room at large. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll continue to support this worthy cause. Education changes lives, and every student who benefits from your generosity tonight will remember that someone believed in their potential." He paused, his gaze finding Marcus again. "Just as I hope everyone here will remember the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or background." The applause started slowly, from a woman near the back of the room, then spread like wildfire until the entire ballroom was clapping. Maya realized that many of the club members were looking at her with new eyes, seeing not the inappropriately dressed temporary worker, but David Chen's daughter, the woman who would someday inherit one of the largest fortunes in the country. Marcus Wellington was clapping too, his smile fixed and desperate, as he tried to salvage something from the wreckage of his evening. David offered Maya his arm. "Shall we go, sweetheart? I thought we might have dinner somewhere and catch up properly." As they walked toward the exit, Maya heard conversations resuming behind them, voices buzzing with excitement and speculation. She knew that by tomorrow morning, the story would be all over Seattle's social circles, growing with each telling until it became legend. At the door, David paused and turned back to Marcus. "Oh, and Marcus, I'll have my people call yours tomorrow about that investment opportunity. I think a change in management might be exactly what this place needs." Outside in the cool Seattle evening, Maya finally found her voice. "How did you know?" David smiled, the same gentle expression she remembered from childhood. "Jessica called me. She was worried about you, and she thought I should know what was happening. Smart girl, that Jessica. But our agreement was that you'd learn to make your own way without my wealth influencing your life. It said nothing about me protecting you from people who mistake kindness for weakness." He squeezed her hand gently. "Besides, you're 23 now, Maya. Close enough to 25 that I think we can start renegotiating our terms." They walked toward his car, a modest sedan that probably cost more than most people's houses but looked utterly unremarkable. Maya realized that her father had learned the same lesson she had about the difference between having money and flaunting it. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now? Now you finish your degree, and we start having regular dinners instead of twice-yearly phone calls. And Marcus Wellington learns that there are consequences for treating people badly, regardless of how much power he thinks he has." David opened the car door for her, then paused. "And Maya, that navy dress looks lovely on you. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you need to change who you are to fit into their world." As they drove away from the Emerald Heights Country Club, Maya realized that the most important lesson of the evening wasn't about money or power or revenge. It was about the difference between being wealthy and being rich, between having class and having cash, and between treating people well because you have to, and treating them well because it's right. Behind them, Marcus Wellington stood in the doorway of his club, watching his carefully constructed world crumble like a house of cards in the wind, finally understanding that some mistakes cost more than money could ever fix. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.